And we'll call the meeting to order. Anastasia, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to share or do a screen share, or do you want to kind of talk through the report? I mean, I wanted to tee you up first to, kind of highlight what you found and give the committee an opportunity to ask any questions they may have about it. But so I don't know if you have a share screen you want to use or.
Yeah, so I prepared a couple of slides, figuring pictures was a lot more interesting than listening to me talk. So let me pull that up right now. And we can go into as much or as little detail as people would like. Let me just find it on my screen. All right, can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes. See it now.
There it is.
This. And so what I prepared was just an overview of what is in that report. So I'll give a brief overview and please feel free to stop me with any questions or to go into more detail. So the report covers the field investigations that happened at the transfer station site in fall of 2020. The conceptual layout for open sand beds at the site that were developed based on those field investigations. There was a groundwater modeling component to the project. And then the last thing I wanted to present was just next steps if the town was looking to go forward with a groundwater discharge permit for the site. So this is the transfer station property and the location of the hydraulic load testing. And this is looking down into the basin on the transfer station. So we did the testing up on this hill here in an undisturbed part of the site. And what we were looking for is this site suitable for groundwater infiltration through open sand beds? The first test that we did was to dig a series of test pits. So these are deep holes about 12 feet deep. And we tried to grab sample around the site and we're looking at what are the subsurface conditions. And what we found is what we anticipated, at least 4 feet of naturally pervious material in each pit and primarily sand, which is very good for infiltration. And we also did a percolation test, which also indicated a high infiltration rate. The next step was to do a boring to groundwater. So this helped us see where groundwater was on the site, and it's about 35 feet down, so pretty deep. And it also gave us a little more information on subsurface conditions. And similar to test pits, we found a lot of sand, which is great. And that boring was finished as a monitoring well, which allowed us to keep track of the groundwater level during our 3-day hydraulic load test to see if a localized mound was building during the testing. So this is a photo of the hydraulic load tests. We had a lot of visitors on site. Mass DP came, Molly was here, and then also members of the town and the wastewater committee. So the first day was the saturation period. Oh, and we also had the help of the Wellfleet Shell Fishing Company, and they provided us water for the testing. So for the first day, all we did was put water in this test basin to create a localized mound underneath the test site and to pre-soak the site. And then we did a series of constant head testing. So we're holding the water at a certain level and seeing how much water we add to hold it at that certain level. And the idea is as much as you're adding, that's going down, right? If you're keeping it at a certain level. And the second day of testing was a falling head test. So that's measuring how long it takes for water to drop a set distance. And these are the results of the testing. So hydraulic capacity is measured for these types of projects in gallons per day for every square foot of the future footprint of the bed. So between the constant head test and the falling head tests, we saw these were the lowest numbers, to be conservative, between 110 and 180 gallons per day per square foot. EPA has a metric where they recommend using about 7 to 10% of what's seen in this type of testing as a loading rate. So that would be between 8 and 18 gallons per day per square foot. And Mass DEP has a more conservative, where if you don't do any testing, but you do have high percolation rates, they typically allow 5. We have worked with DEP based on these types of very high rates that we typically see on the Cape to get a slightly higher loading rate of 7, which is what we use for our conceptual sizing for the sand beds. And so this is the conceptual layout of the sand beds. It was based on what's called an alternative build-out flow that was developed by Cape Cod Commission. And so they did a build-out analysis for the site based on population projections for how much nitrogen needed to be removed through sewering to meet the TMDL. And as you can see, we're not using the entire available area of the site. So there is the potential to increase the effluent disposal capacity at the site.
Anastasia, can I just ask you 2 questions right there? One is, from the previous slide, it looks like basically you were able to qualify the site for, for 2 gallons per day more per square foot than what the DEP maximum allowable would be. Is that a correct?
Yes, for design. So let me just elaborate that on a little bit. What Mass DEP typically lets you do is they might let you push it a little bit for design. And then once you have treated effluent, you can go through pilot testing to request an even higher rate, which is what some of the communities on the Cape are doing.
So you were able to qualify 2 more gallons per day per square foot than what DEP would have otherwise granted?
Yes, yeah. And
So
that's an assumption that would need to be verified with DEP.
So in essence, what it does though is it gives us, it just makes the footprint potentially a little smaller.
Yes.
But
And then
the other thing, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Too? But like the measured amount is at between 110 and 180, but we're only allowed to go to 7 to 10% of that. That seems like a super duper safety factor. I have never heard of a safety factor of that great.
Yes, and that's based on the fact that this is a much smaller version of what would actually be built. And as you maintain a constant groundwater mound at the site, they're anticipating the loading rate to go down. So that's a reflection of that. But they do allow you to try to bring it back up once you have treated effluents and can pilot your system. But yes, that is a
90 to 93% is your. I mean, that's a huge safety factor.
It is.
But that's what we have to live with.
Yes, and that's consistent with all the other systems that have been built on the Cape.
Okay, and just from an engineering point of view, I've never heard of a safety factor that great. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, no, that's a point well made.
And so on the next slide, what you're driving at though is the footprint given that type of a loading rate would, for the 133,500 is for 425,000 gallons per day.
On an average annual with half of them out of service for redundancy. Okay. So it's a fairly conservative footprint.
So in other words, if we had, if a pilot facility ends up proving out, much better numbers, per what Fred was saying, that same square footage then could be, 5, 6, 7, or some percentage larger of a flow rate.
Exactly.
Okay.
So say, for example, you do 14 gallons per day per square foot, you're essentially doubling the capacity of those beds from 7 to 14.
And
which,
you're-
as Fred pointed out, is way below the rates that were actually seen during the testing.
Yeah, and so in your experience on the Cape, is the initial number that DEP is saying we've got to design to typical, or would something that looks closer to, what you actually found be more realistic?
So we're currently working with the community in the early stages of looking at about 11 to 14. These are better soils than what they have, but it is an incremental process. So we would have to go through the DPP process, but I would figure something in the range of 10 to 20 gallons per day per square foot is what they would be open to initially.
And that's more likely what we may end up with if we were using this location.
Yes.
Okay.
And it could be an incremental process. And if you get it to 20 and it consistently works very well, you could ask for an increase. But based on past experience, I think it would be an incremental process to increase the capacity.
The big thing I'm trying to drive at is that it looks like under any of the worst case scenarios, this location could handle the entire town's needs.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Yes.
Sorry. So why was the alternative build out load used in calculating this? I thought it was based on the build out load.
That is what that number is. The
No,
420.
it's not. That's for the alternative build out load.
The 425, Ryan, is including max build out.
No, it's not. The 425, it says right in the sign, is alternative build out load. Was it the alternative build out load, Anastasia, or the build out load?
It is the alternative. So the Cape Cod Commission calculations outline 2 build outs. So SMAST, who does the MEP reports, does a full build out based on zoning.
So we've already hit the alternative build out load numbers in terms of construction within the town, present day.
Brian, why don't we take that? We'll take that offline. I mean, I think that's a comment. My understanding is that specifically what was tasked out in the original scope of work was to do, to use a level of requirement that would meet the worst case scenario, including the build out.
Which this does not.
Well, I guess one comment I'd make, Ryan, I hear what you're saying. There were 2 build outs, and that you're right. There's one that's higher than this. I think and correct me if I'm wrong, Anastasia, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think what she was just saying is that this footprint we're looking at could be half the size if we got the higher infiltration rate, which sounds like a reasonable estimate from what I'm hearing Anastasia say. Therefore, I guess what I'm thinking is, would it be possible then, if you were to get the higher rate that you were thinking might be achievable, doesn't this square we're looking at, instead of 425, go to 850?
Right.
Would that be right, Anastasia?
Yes, but that would require the facility to be permitted first for the lower rate, right? It would be a phased process.
And what would be, I mean, just to Ryan's question, because we're all thinking worst case and then worst case and so forth. And who knows where we're going to end up, but certainly worth talking about. What would be required to get DEP to say that, yeah, this definitely meets 425 and it might meet 850 if in fact we need that? Because I think the 850 would cover the worst case build out. What else would be required to get there?
Well, the other thing, Scott, is that there's more area
There's more
here that
room
can be
here
used
too,
anyway.
right,
So, to me, it looks like you could be anywhere from 425 to maybe 1.3 million in that, in the area that's available there.
And if it's, just looking at those 4 squares, you could easily fit 4 more of them, right? And double the capacity within the wooded area. If it's helpful, I can develop a second layout for the ultimate build out.
Maybe, I mean, Ryan's raising a good point. Again, the numbers seem off the charts to many of us in terms of likelihood, but he's right. There were 2 build outs done. And if it looks like our results are such that we could handle either, it sounds like it would be advantageous to say so. And then there won't be, that would put any future discussions, debates about that to bed, if in fact that's doable, either by increasing the geography or by estimating potentially a higher infiltration rate.
Yeah, and to Scott's point, you know, I think having a range of what's possible in this footprint would be helpful. So it's sort of, you know, this particular use of the space, you know, amounts to the 425. This other configuration within the space sort of maxed out would look like, you know, this type of flow, and it could be, you know, double that amount of flow, you know, based on experience going forward with what the site can actually, you know, tolerate. But something like that, that's
Yeah.
sort of couches the range of possibility for this location.
Anastasia, has your report been finalized? I can't remember.
No, it hasn't.
Okay. Well, maybe this is something to consider, you know, talk to people at your shop and see if it would be possible to amend the language or maybe the figure to achieve, I think I think the other number is 700 something. It's less than double this. You know, maybe there's a way to handle that in the report without doing additional work.
It would be fairly easy to do. And
Yeah.
what I would recommend is showing that you have the capacity with a typical range.
Yeah.
And then, you know, talking through pilot testing, essentially what it becomes is more cost effective because you're not spending as much cost for open sand beds, but it has
Right,
flexibility either way.
I
So I can definitely add that language.
That would be great. I think the big picture question was and has been and still is, can the site handle worst case flows?
So let me ask you another question here. Is that violet line the area where you're considering, you know, the percolation? In which anywhere in that violet line, we could put these create this percolation.
Yeah, so the violet line is the property boundaries of the transfer station parcel. Mass DEP requires you to keep at least 25 feet from the property lines. We typically use 100 to give a little bit more buffer, but there is a little bit of play there if you need more space in your site. And so what we would be looking at is anything that's wooded, because the southwestern corner is the transfer station, and that's already in use. But we can look at maximizing the wooded area for open sand beds.
But it's
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
that
it's
makes sense. I
bluish.
just was like thinking that, I mean, I know the area well, and just, you know, to be honest, you know, to everyone is that my house is literally right on Pheasant Run, which is next to the dump road. So, you know, I know the area really well because I walk the dog over there every day. So I just like, you know, full transparency. I'm just kind of going, okay, well, you know, there's a lot of area there. I mean, that there's a lot of area there where the sand beds could, you know, could extend to. I don't see, I mean, like, even if it was double, if it was 850,000 GPD, it looks like you could create sand beds for all of that, you know.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Perfect. And that's really what we were hoping, you know, is to basically be in a position where, you know, this location could handle the foreseeable needs of the town. That was really, I think, the question. Anybody else have any other questions? You want to, continue, Anastasia?
Sure. So the next step in the process was to take the footprint that was developed and to develop a local scale model based on the USGS regional model that's developed for the flow lens. So what's shown here is the groundwater contours. In blue is the regional model, and in orange is the local model. So what you're looking for is that they're similar, but they refine. So how you refine the model is you make the model cells that it's made out of smaller, so that you can model on a more finite basis. So you do anticipate to see differences in the contours, but they should follow the same general pattern. And then here's our site, that transfer station parcel, and it's located within the high toss less than 10 subwatershed of the Wellfleet Harbor watershed. And we did a particle track analysis. So this simulates where the nitrogen that's in the effluent, where it would reach the nearest surface water. So what's called particles are dropped in the model. And what's shown here in the red lines is the track of the different particles. So what it's showing is that all the particles are anticipated to stay in the high toss less than 10 watershed. And the majority of them, about 70%, will surface in the Herring River to the north, and about 30% will surface in the wetland system to the south. And the other thing we did with the groundwater model is to model what the mounding on top of the baseline groundwater mound would be with the anticipated flow rate. And what it showed is for the average flow rate of 425,000 gallons per day, the top of that mound would be a little less than 2 feet. With groundwater about 35 feet below the surface, what that indicates is that you have plenty of room for to groundwater. And so the mounding is not a concern.
Anastasia, if I can just jump in here again, if we're
course.
gonna amend the report to include the worst case, and again, I think the number is 700 something, 740, would it be pretty easy to run another simulation here? Is this done? This is done through ModFlow or HandTush?
Through ModFlow.
Okay, well, I don't know, that may be more work than I thought then, but I mean, I think it sounds like it sounds like you can almost make the conclusion without doing the model.
Yeah.
But back to Ryan's point, if we're going to look at worst case, we'd want to evaluate. And again, we were talking earlier, design flow versus peak flow. We're modeling design flow, which is peak flow rather than average here.
So this modeling is the average because it's looking at a year-round condition.
Right, at 425, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, to match, also do the modeling at the same number for consistency.
I guess what what it's kind of where all of us are coming from is to try to at least pull out the assumptions so we know what's different about our actual situation. So for example, the 425 is average year round and we're seasonal. We already we want to be able to get a feel for how different our actual requirements might look. So in other words, calling out that assumption so that so it's clear would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it would also give indication if you did increase the capacity of your pit. It would be a similar flow pattern to expanding the beds.
And just as a reference, I think the MEP report for Wellfleet uses an estimated average flow of 145 gallons per day per house. And that would be the equivalent of either 330 gallons per day or 440 for a 3 or 4 bedroom house. And I believe they based that on actual water rates in Orleans because there were not enough of them in Wellfleet. But I think the estimate that MEP uses here is 145 gallons per day per house for an average flow, wastewater flow.
So the other thing I guess that would be helpful, Scott, and maybe, you know, you're going to talk with Anastasia more about this offline anyway.
Yep.
But to drill down on what the 425 actually means,
Sure.
you know, would be helpful. You know, whether that's, because in my mind, the numbers that the 425 in my mind was representing the amount of nitrogen that we needed to remove.
Yeah, we can certainly, happy to talk more about that, Anastasia. Again, there's MEP assumptions, there's USGS assumptions on that. You guys probably have your own assumptions. So you're right though, Kurt, the nitrogen loads are going to be different than the design flows by most people's estimates, including MEP, and I think USGS as well.
So in my, you know, so my question is the 425 equivalent to our build out nitrogen removal requirements or not?
For that alternate build out that Cape Cod Commission derived. So they came up with, there's the maximum build out that's in the MEP reports. And then they came out, based on that memo, they came out with a build out based on population projections. And that's the alternate build out. They translated that into a nitrogen load and then into a flow. So what we're using here is the equivalent flow.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions on this one? Nope. Okay.
I think my bottom line on this, and Anastasia, I don't know if you spoke. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Oh, we got more. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, very, very quickly. If the town did go forward with a groundwater discharge permit, it's a two-step application process. And this report provides the background information that would be used in that first step, which is the hydrogeologic evaluation report. So that's where the state looks and makes sure that this is a good site for the discharge that you're asking for. And then the second step would be the actual permit application itself. And sorry, Scott, did you want to go back to the question you had started on or the comment?
No, I'll wait till you're done. Sorry.
Do we need to get a groundwater discharge permit in order to get our other permit approved?
I do not believe so. When we met with Brian Dudley to find out what we would need to do, it was, in fact, we had the discussion about it's not the full, in fact, it wasn't even the full hydrogeo report, as I recall. It was, we went through the list of normal things that are included in there, and he identified the things that he felt were critical to answer the question, is the site capable of handling the full flow? But I don't believe, my understanding is that DEP is not going to require a groundwater discharge permit as part of the targeted watershed plan, but we can.
Well, I'm just kind of putting this out there is that, like, you know, I mean, like, it's not that much more to get the permit, right?
Right.
Much more permit to go after that permit. That permit has a life. I'm sure it's, you know, good for 5-10 years, but
5 years usually.
yeah, before you have to build out. You know, it might be cost effective to go for it now and just simply say, have it in our back pocket. If for some reason the town says, you know what, we're gonna drop $50 million and we're gonna put it in a sewage treatment plant, and this is where we're gonna do it. Got the permit in hand.
We can actually, the thing, Fred, with that is that we can actually pull the trigger at any time. I think Brian Dudley was most concerned about what's the capacity of this location. And so I think
I hear you, Kurt, but requirements change year to year. So
no, I know, but the
requirement this year, why don't we might want to, if it's not that much more expensive, it's sort of like a cost-effective thing. It's cost-effective to get that permit and put it in our back pocket now. You know, as it might be worth it.
yeah, I don't know what the cost would be, but the idea here is that this design clearly exceeds anything that the town's likely to need or require, especially when you look at what's available from, enhanced IA septic systems. So when you start to, the question is, how much money do you want to keep throwing at this particular effort, as opposed to directing some of that money at, implementation of the wastewater plan, and the watershed permit itself.
Once again, we go back to, is it cost effective?
Yeah, I don't know.
So typically, these permits are filed during the final design of a plan. So the steps that you've taken are used in the planning, whether it's a CWMP or a TWMP as you're pursuing, reviewed by the state. And then once you're actually ready to design the plans, that's typically when the process is undergone.
Thanks. Got it. That sounds good.
And Anastasia, just for giggles, what do you think the cost would be to actually get the groundwater discharge permit? Nothing that we're going to hold you to, but just roughly, what do they typically cost?
Ballpark, don't hold me to it, but probably 5,000 to 10,000 in that range. And it's primarily pulling together the report for the evaluation using this information and then pulling together the two applications. If you do need a more refined number, I can get that for you.
That's okay. I mean, like, the worst case scenario is $10,000. What you're really saying to us is that this isn't the time to do it. It's the timing. It's not just the cost, it's the timing.
I think that it would be more typical to do it once you've actually decided to construct the facility. So I don't see the advantage of going through the actual permitting process now. Fred, that you had mentioned that sometimes the conditions change, but the permits do need to be renewed every 5 years. So I'm not sure if you would buy yourself a lot of time in locking down certain permit conditions.
Anastasia, isn't there also an annual cost to maintain the permit once you get it?
There are.
I know there is on the private side.
So municipal, some of those fees get waived. They're typically reporting requirements. Where I hesitated was if you don't have the facility yet, how much of that permit or how much reporting to do. But there probably is a nominal cost associated with it.
Great. Well, that's very, very helpful. Anybody have any other questions for Anastasia? So I guess the next steps would be just to, I hope the input from the committee's been helpful.
Oh, it's been very helpful. Thank you.
Tough group of customers. But,
no, that's exactly why we submitted as a draft, so that we could get your comments and incorporate them into the final document. So this has been very helpful.
And Ryan, did you have any other observations there?
No, that was it, just on the build out load.
Okay.
Thank you.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you very, very much. John? Yep.
Yeah, I guess I want to reinforce what Ryan said in the sense that it's important that when we think about future build out, we also take into consideration if we have a wastewater system that allows us to put in greater density than we would if we didn't have the wastewater system. So we can't assume the density based on what would happen if we didn't have the wastewater system in. I mean, one of the pressures the town is under is for affordable housing. One of the things that's holding us back on affordable housing is the inability to put in greater density, particularly say in the downtown area, because we have no way to deal with the sewage discharge. If we have a municipal sewage system that allows us to increase our density downtown. So I do think we have to consider when we're looking at these numbers, not just conditions could be without a municipal system, but what conditions could be with a municipal system. So, which I think is what Ryan was getting at. I may be wrong about that. Well,
in terms of density, John, we've gone back and forth with this a number of times, but the density is controlled by distance to a well of a septic system. So you're right that that's limited, especially in the downtown area, if you don't have a public water supply and you're depending on a well, an on-site well. But certainly for the downtown area, that's all now on public water. So that no longer is a constraint.
There is a constraint around the sewage.
No,
But
there's
anyway,
not.
I don't want to get
Not
into
anymore.
that.
Yeah, not anymore. Not once you have access to public water, that's no longer a constraint. And you know, the water system is going to be built up Briar Lane coming up Route 6. You know, that'll take care of the Briar Lane area, which did have some constraints. It's running down Main Street, so a lot of the town spent a lot less money by putting in water than putting in wastewater. Wastewater, you know, wastewater system is going to be a lot more expensive than public water supply.
No question about that.
So if I could just add one thing for that, if this facility was going to be built, it would be eligible for 0% nutrient-related funding. One of the requirements for that funding is to pass either a flow neutral bylaw or regulation, which requires the town to go through that analysis to see in the future what would the flow be and to limit that. So for example, Chatham limits their future flow to what's allowable under Title V, even though you don't have that restriction with the sewer. So you would do a similar analysis for the system here. And it's exactly for what you're mentioning, to control unlimited growth now that you do have a sewer system.
Anyone else? Fred?
I mean, just on that subject, I hear what you're saying. In other words, we could, if we had a sewer system, we could reduce the plot size because we have a sewer system in town water. We wouldn't necessarily have to put houses on an acre, right? Because, you know, or you know, for a 4-bedroom house. So the idea is that, you know, we'd want to limit that by saying we can't because you know, our wastewater system can only handle this much. That's what we told. That's what we had to agree to, and that's what the bylaw we passed. Correct?
I think the zoning question is something that we probably want to save for another time. That's a big kettle of fish.
Yeah, well, it's a more curiosity than anything.
Yeah, I think our primary responsibility is to have a watershed permit that meets the nitrogen reduction requirements, period. And, you know, we'll get to that in a second. Here, the next thing we have on here is the town meeting article where, you know, we've got I'll start with Scott's plan. We've got some slides there we can talk about, but that gets at what the alternative would look like and then starts to get at cost differences and so on. So, and I know Elaine and Gary are on here, and one of the items in that is of course addressing the 95 Lawrence Road project as well. So does anybody have anything else for Anastasia? Nope. Terrific. Anastasia, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. It's great work.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. So I am going to try to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. So basically, this is the running list of items that we had talked about previously for a potential town meeting warrant article. And Scott, do you want to kind of just maybe go through these again and talk about the sensitivities that we may have around some of the numbers?
Sure. Yeah, so the first one would be to support, if the Board of Health does decide to enact the regulation that we've proposed, and we've had, just as a reminder, we've had, I think, 2 or 3 meetings with the board, and I guess I would characterize it as been pretty positive in terms of their consideration of this. And the idea would be to first of all, limit the number of standard Title V's going forward, and to try to get so-called enhanced INAs in there as we go forward. The way the regulation is written is that the town would provide a subsidy, and this number says 10,000. We've been going back and forth between 10,000 and 12,500 based upon some cost estimates from some of the contractors. But the idea would be that's about the difference in cost for the equipment to do the nitrogen removal for some of these enhanced INA systems. So this number here, the health regulation subsidy, would be to provide that funding such that the Board of Health, well, through the Board of Health, I guess the town would provide the subsidy on an estimated 50 systems per year. The 50 number comes from some data that Hillary had provided to me in terms of an estimate of new systems, repairs, and upgrades per year. In fact, I think the actual number was like 65. But we just estimated it around 50 to get the program going. So that is where that number comes from, the 500,000. We've also had quite a few discussions about a RME, or responsible management entity, because if the town decides to go this way and start investing in more INAs, I think Hillary would be the first one, and I believe she's not on with us here. I don't want to speak for her if she is here, or I don't want to speak for her if she's not here either, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't feel she has the capacity to take on managing all of these additional systems. And some preliminary conversations with people from DEP and EPA suggest that we'd need some sort of a management entity. So we've got a placeholder here, $100,000. We don't know that that's the right number ultimately, but it's a placeholder to probably develop this probably would be done initially by contracting, to get somebody to manage all of these systems going in. And by manage, it could include the operation and maintenance, the testing, as well as the reporting to DEP, because DEP is going to want to have an annual report on how well these systems are working, if in fact this is part of our targeted watershed permit. So that's what those numbers are. I can keep going here, or stop me as I go.
Yeah, does anybody have any kind of questions or comments on that?
One question I have is the first set of numbers here, these are basically annual numbers, not a one-shot deal, whereas some of these,
Yes.
the next one, for instance, 95 Lawrence, is more of a one-shot cost, correct?
That's correct. And Kurt and I spoke earlier today. In fact, I have some numbers in front of me on my computer. When we get to the 95 Lawrence, Kurt had a good suggestion that we try to identify what might come in years 2 and 3, as you're suggesting, Richard. And I have some of those numbers for you, but this first one, you're absolutely correct. If the town were to adopt that regulation, and if the estimate of 50 systems per year is accurate, and that's just a projection, then that would be an annual estimate of those costs. That's right.
Is the idea that anybody that would agree to this would get the subsidy, so that we might be looking at 60 or 70?
That's certainly possible. That's certainly possible. It's a good question. And I'm not sure how the town would actually, whether they just fund the first 50 or how that would work. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and I think part of getting this outlined this way, so we can start to have those discussions, because everything's not exactly straightforward. And when we get to the funding side, Richard, that's the other thing is, if the town meeting votes for one thing, and then 70 people walk through the door instead of 50, which is what you budgeted for, what are you going to do?
The other question I have is this for, I can't remember what the regulation says that we're asking to put in. Is it for new and replacement systems and upgrades of systems, or is it all of the above, or are we saying, listen, if you're putting more, you're going to be putting more bedrooms on the house, this is on you, and you have to put an innovative system in?
Okay, so let me give you a little more information. Good question. The way the regulation currently reads is that if you're within a certain distance of a wetland, the town is requiring an INA system. That's the way it is today. The proposed regulation would change that and provide the jurisdiction of a requirement for an INA everywhere in the Wellfleet Harbor watershed as identified by MEP where nitrogen reductions are required. So first thing it does is it broadens that requirement from the existing. And then secondly, it provides an option to the homeowner. They can either put in what I'll call a regular INA, which is what's going in the ground now, or if they choose one of these so-called enhanced INAs, which we believe have a significantly better treatment level, that's where the town would step in and provide the subsidy, not for the regular INAs, if you will. So that's why I think the 50 number might be reasonable, because if the annual number is 65, I don't know that all 65 are going to opt to go to the enhanced one. With some have the right to just pick, the way the regulation's written, to just pick one of the regular INA systems, as they're doing today. Does that help answer your question, Gary?
Kurt, yeah. Relative to the discussion we just had about density, if someone were to put in the enhanced IA system, would it increase their density in terms of number of bedrooms per square foot?
That's a good question
It's a
too.
great question, yeah.
And it certainly could. We've actually done some calculations that suggest if you go from a Title V to an enhanced INA, that's about an 80% reduction in nitrogen. And then if you add a bedroom back in, that bumps it up another 10 or 15%. So in other words, it's possible and likely that you can have your cake and eat it too here. And one of the, I'll just mention, because we talked about affordable housing earlier, one of the state sort of suggested strategies for dealing with affordable housing as an addition or an option to building a housing project, like we're talking about 95 Lawrence, is to do something called inclusionary zoning, where somebody can add an apartment or whatnot at their home. And this might enable that. Yes.
Emily, I saw you put your hand up. Dive in.
Thanks. So Truro would like to know if you have a target number of enhanced IEA systems that you are trying to achieve, and if that's specific, Scott, to like sub-watersheds, or how are you
Yes.
looking at that? Thanks.
Yes, we absolutely do. We have I have a table that goes embayment by embayment, and it provides two numbers. It provides an estimated number of systems for the build-out growth. And secondly, it provides an estimated number of existing systems that would get converted. And again, the way we've been talking about this is we prefer not to go knock on people's doors and say, you got to upgrade your system this year, but rather wait for them to come into the Board of Health for some other reason, as you well know, Emily, a repair, upgrade, and at that point trigger the option. I think it's more, my sense is it's more amenable and easier sell to the homeowner, and more cost effective. So short answer to the question, I gave you the long answer. The short answer is yes, we have numbers for each sub-embayment. And I know you may be most interested in the Herring River, and those are the smallest numbers because that's the watershed in town that's in the best condition.
Elaine?
Hi, thank you. I'm fascinated by how much I'm starting to understand about all this. But, something that Scott just said about inclusionary zoning, we have been trying to get the planning board to do that for about a decade, but we are bringing forward a petitioned article for an accessory dwelling bylaw, which would be allowing another dwelling. And we've sort of been told by the planning board that that would involve double tanking. I don't know if you know anything about that. If you're
Double
putting another,
tanking, meaning two septic tanks?
yeah.
Emily,
Boy,
do you have a?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt, because we go through this in Truro, and Hillary and I have been talking about it. Elaine, under Title V, if you have a wastewater flow other than single family, it requires either a 2-compartment septic tank, or you can do 2 tanks in series. And that's just to handle the different type of flow. So it can still be residential flow, but it's not single family, and therefore you have to go through this provision. It adds cost to creating an ADU. So it's the state requirement. So
If that's an enhanced IA, would that still apply? Because you would be putting in you'd be putting in the intermediate processing tank anyway.
yes, that's in Truro, we don't require a separate septic tank. We just those components can qualify it. Yeah. So
Okay.
You know, I'll throw out, while we're on this subject, I'll throw out one other, I think, interesting advantage to going towards this enhanced INA route. And this comes from another conversation I was recently in. Some of this INA systems, and Emily, you might be able to add to this, have gotten permission from DEP to have a reduced footprint on the leach field. And the two of the commercial technologies that we are looking at, and we've had come in and talk to the Board of Health, and those are Nitrex and Nitro, Emily. Both of them have claimed to have, and they're both provisional approval right now, but both of them claim to have, and I've seen some of the data, very good BOD and solids data, which is exactly what DEP uses to then grant that reduced leach field area. And I believe they can go as far as up to 50%, cut it in half. Right now, Board of Health can grant 25% reduction under Title V, but if the INA gets approved, they can go to 50%. And again, I'm not in a position to promise anything, but I can tell you that the data we've been looking at from specifically the Nitro system looks like they're in pretty good position once they get general approval, that they'd might be able to get as much as a 50% reduction. And that goes back to the question about footprints in the downtown area, because whoever raised that, it is a good point that, you know, so I know I've attended some Board of Health meetings, and some of these systems are getting shoehorned into the lots with, you know, all kinds of setbacks, and it does get tricky just in terms of setbacks. But I think a big factor there could be this additional benefit of the reduced leach field. And Emily, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. You're the expert.
no, you nailed it. Thanks, Scott.
Okay. I'll let you stand in for Hillary. I hope that's okay with Hillary's.
I don't want to belabor this, but I have a question here. And it's just a curiosity question more than anything. So what you're saying, in other words, like we got, you know, when we go out and the health board, you know, puts out this regulations, you know, there's got to be some pros and cons here, right? You know, and the pro is, of course, you know, and there's got to be some benefits. So what I'm hearing here is that because we're reducing the nitrogen load by so greatly by these INA systems, we should be able to, that people could put on additional bedrooms to their lot, and that would be a benefit to the owner to go to one of these, as well as the subsidy. Is that what?
Right. That's right. Yep. I think that's
is there any like agita about that? Because I think, you know, to me that's like, okay, bingo. That would get everybody in the town going. You mean I can have a 15-bedroom house?
Oh, wait a minute. We didn't say 15 bedrooms.
Well, I'm being facetious here, but I'm like, I can go to, you know, I have a 3-bedroom house I'm on a, you know, almost an acre, but I'm not on an acre, and I have a 3-bedroom house. I'd like to go to a 4-bedroom house, and like if I put in this, you know, this innovative and alternative system, and you give me this subsidy, will you allow me also to put on that 4th bedroom? You know, is that going to be just kind of like, yep, that's a check mark in the checkbox?
Well, right now, the putting in an IA gives you another bedroom anyway. So that's already part of what we're doing as current regulation. Where we go with this after that, like I said, the zoning stuff really starts to get tricky. We've been focusing primarily on what do we need to do to cost effectively remove nitrogen from the watershed. And I think that zoning question is one that we still need to tackle and is much more complicated.
It's just my curiosity running wild, Kurt. Thanks for getting us back on track.
Just to give you a little data point for that, the ADU bylaw being proposed has a limitation of being, if you're going to rent it, you have to rent it for a whole year. And what we don't want to do is increase the number of bedrooms, which would increase the B&B effect and exacerbate the shortage of available housing, year-round housing. So it is a tricky question.
Yeah. Anything else on enhanced IAs?
Okay, so let me jump to 95 Lawrence.
Emily?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Emily, I
Go
didn't
ahead.
see.
No, not at all. I'm sorry. I just wanted to just thank you for the meeting this afternoon. I'm sorry I have to jump out. I have a select board meeting to go to, but I look forward to the next time that I could join you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well,
Thanks,
thank you,
Emily.
Emily.
All right, take care.
So 95 Lawrence, I forget who asked the question, sorry, but this is a one-time cost as opposed to the last one, although there are other costs that are even greater coming in years 2 and 3. And I can give you some of those numbers. I have it pulled up here, but this is.
And before you dive into those, Scott,
Yep.
Gary and Elaine in particular.
Yep.
One of the things that we're concerned about, especially in terms of continue to support, your efforts and the project, the question that I had was, if we put up this number for a groundwater discharge permit as part of the warrant article, the most logical question is going to be, what does this commit the town to in the future, or what's next? And so strategically, I think the question is, do we lay out a 1, 2, 3 year kind of what this looks like commitment, or, how do we approach that? But go ahead and Scott, and at least, provide the numbers.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you numbers from the on-site engineering report, which was recently completed. They did an excellent job, I might add, I think. So this, first of all, this 150,000 is for the permitting, the groundwater discharge permit would enable the larger facility that we've been talking about. The numbers that I have, I'll just read them, and these are directly out of the on-site engineering report. For the, they give 2 numbers for the, let's call it the option, the first increased option, which is just the municipal buildings at a flow of, I think 20,000 gallons per day. The capital cost is $2.5 million. Okay, for that treatment plant. And I'll just give you the other number, we can come back to it. The higher number with the whole neighborhood, and this is a flow of around 30, a little higher, 32,000 gallons per day is, and that would include the municipal buildings, the affordable housing project, and X number of homes in the neighborhood. I don't know how many, but we can figure that out later. That number is 4.7 million. So 2.5 and 4.7. And those costs would come during construction, whenever that might be. And then I should mention, there are O&M costs to run the plant, and I can just give you those too. For the smaller version, the municipal buildings only, it's $72,000 per year. For the larger facility, including everything, is $81,000 per year. And I'm rounding these numbers off, but they're pretty close.
These just the town's cost, or
Well,
the total cost, and some of it shared by the developer?
Well, I may defer to somebody else, but I can tell you, we talked about that with Dave Formato and Hillary. We had and I forget if Kurt was on there. And I think the idea is that the developer would pay whatever they were going to pay if they had gone it alone. And that would be a contribution towards the town's expense. So these numbers I'm giving you are the full cost. And I believe, and again, I defer to others here, that the RFP was going to, the way David was talking about is I think the idea was to convey a cost to the developer that would be the same as if there was not a larger town project. And I do have those numbers here too. I could give those to you.
Yeah,
from Dave.
he came up with that number. So it's, he did fix that number for us.
Yep. I can give you those numbers alone. I didn't do that, but since you asked the question, let me give it to you. The cost for the Lawrence Road only, the capital cost is $764,000. And that's the total capital cost. And the O&M annual operations is $19,400. So those might be the numbers, but again, I don't want to, somebody else may know more.
So the contract or the RFP is in the select board's agenda for tomorrow or
Yep.
for tonight. And it does, the town has 2 years from the date of the execution of the agreement to install the system, not 3. If it goes to 3 years, then the developer has, there's a a fallback position for the developer to proceed with the development with just the INA system to service just the 95 Lawrence Road project itself, not the surrounding sewer sheds. So instead of a 3-year time horizon, we're looking at probably a 2-year time horizon for funding requests for this. That's it. Sorry.
Gary?
Scott, I have a couple of questions. Cloverleaf project in Truro, I'm sorry, Emily's not here. They propose an IA system. I wonder what their budget is for that. But the second part of that is that it's been challenged now in the courts. So it's certainly delaying their implementation by a good year or so. And if we were to go forward with that, would that eliminate the possibility of a challenge if we have the wastewater treatment?
I mean, obviously, everybody has a right to sue, but I would think so. And I don't know that much about the Cloverleaf project, but what I've heard is some of the concerns are water quality concerns. And as I think we all know here, the whole purpose of this larger project was to address those water quality concerns and not only mitigate the affordable housing project, but have it be a net benefit, which I think I do a lot of expert witness work in court, and I'll take the side of the town in this one any day.
I'm just saying there is a positive spin to this.
Very much so.
Yes.
Very much so.
When we have experience, it's roughly the same size project.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what would, be the opposite side of a lawsuit challenging this on water quality grounds. I mean, this is going to be, in fact, my view is the town should get an award for this. To provide affordable housing and cleanup of an estuary. That's not a lot of those around.
Opposed to in subsequent years. The case is fairly strong to do it now for all the reasons that you've talked about. And the other thing that strikes me is that much of this could be deferred under a Mass Works grant. And if we showed the good faith, we don't have to borrow the money now. We just this is an authorization to borrow. And would it make more sense to include it now as opposed to in subsequent years?
Right. That's exactly right. And we'll get to there's a slide right after this where we talk about the grant sources. So anyway, does anybody have any other questions on at least the 95 Lawrence components here?
So, the groundwater discharge permit is the one thing, but, in the future, we're going to have the additional costs for an INA system, whether it's just municipal buildings or municipal buildings and the neighborhood. Should we not kind of say, hey guys, full disclosure here, this is the preliminary cost estimates. There will be other costs as we go forward, and we should probably bring those to light. But we're just, this is like, the first bite at the apple that we're going to need. And if we commit to this, we may have to commit to additional. We're already going down that road.
Yeah, I think
we'll pull back the curtain and show them how we're going to pay for all of this, and then it's not going to increase taxes.
Well, there's kind of this gets back to the overall pitch that I think we need to start to be talking about, which is you know, this set of alternatives has one set of costs for the town of Wellfleet as a whole. You know, and Scott's trying to work on what that whole would look like. But it's a big number. And the alternative is, you know, something that looks like 150 or more million for, you know, building the wastewater treatment plant and hooking everybody up to that system. And so those are the, you know, those are kind of the two, you know, the tales of two cities. One of the things that Scott's gotten some pretty good numbers on lately is what the cost per connection looks like, you know, for a homeowner per connection compared with, you know, providing a subsidy for an enhanced INA system, for example. So there's a number of other things that Scott's been working on behind the scenes that aren't quite, you know, fully formed, but at least in terms of being able to provide some strategy for presenting this. John, you were.
Yeah, I do think there's a hybrid here. That is, it may be not reasonable to hook the whole town to a municipal system, especially South Wellfleet, some of the outlying areas. On the other hand, it may be that we have move those areas, go to the enhanced alternative system, and the more densely populated areas, the downtown area, the area around Central Wellfleet, that would have to go to a wastewater treatment. I mean, I don't think it's the whole town wastewater treatment or no wastewater treatment. I think there's many different options. There's the alternative system for the whole town. There is the wastewater system for some of the town and the enhanced alternative system for other parts of the town. I just think we need to think about a series of different options as opposed to one or the other. My concern is we go one or the other, we're going to throw out a very expensive whole town wastewater treatment system that no one wants to spend the money on. But at the same time, we find out that the alternative system doesn't work for the reduction we want, and we end up having to put the treatment system in anyway. I just want us to keep all our options open and keep a sense of there's a continuum of different ways we can approach this problem, not just one and or the other.
Right, and that's, you know, that's why I think why we have all these alternatives and a wastewater treatment option. they're all in play. I think the question is to look at, you know, where's the compelling financial argument in terms of directing resources? Where do you start first? What do you do first? You know, that's really the practical question. You know, I think sort of the compelling arguments for especially innovative alternative septics is you don't have water transference issues. You're getting the same reduction in nitrogen. You're getting better, you know, personal, you know, care. You know, the contaminants of emerging concern reduction. If you get a footprint advantage by being able to reduce the leach field, you may end up in the same place as if you had tied that home into a septic system or into a sewage treatment system anyway. You know, in terms of net available development. So some of those questions we don't have the answers to because we're sort of trying to take baby steps. But I think your point is dead nuts right on. You know, we can't lose sight of any alternative. There, you know, it may make sense to do just like what we're proposing with 95 Lawrence, which is that's essentially a small wastewater treatment system in that area. So you've got a mini collection system that's traditional wastewater treatment. And that was the first opportunistic project that came along, and it's a great one. But it is to your point, John, that connecting systems in a more densely populated area may make more sense than even enhanced IAs. So, you know, you're absolutely right.
The other thing is, you know, can we build into the permit application or our wastewater plan trigger points to do exactly that? Kind of say, okay, if if these are the things that happen, then we should go to a small wastewater treatment project. If we don't have those things happen, this is the direction we're going to go.
I think that's
Defense statements.
Yeah, the thing about 95 Lawrence that made it unique was its huge density. because it's an affordable housing development by itself, you've got tremendous density. So it's a logical, one to pick off first. And then we have, there may be other opportunities that come down the pike like that.
Well, that's what I'm
So,
saying. Is
yeah.
you just described the trigger point. The density was there, so therefore, a small wastewater system was the direction we wanted to look at. And then we said, well, what else could we add to it to make it even more valuable to the town? So,
Right.
Fred, I think you're making a really good point here, and it's something I've been thinking about, and that is the town has commissioned 2 prior studies on sewering the downtown area. One was done by Environmental Partners and one was done by Woodard and Curran. We have those reports, and in fact, I'm summarizing them in my report. That could be an alternative in this adaptive management plan, I think, as you're suggesting. And it could be something that is put in the plan that doesn't get triggered in the first, the plan's probably going to go in 5-year increments. That's the way DEP has been doing this. So, for example, in the first phase 1, first 5 years, maybe you don't trigger that and we try these INAs. And as you're suggesting, if they're not as effective or they're more expensive than we thought, whatever, then maybe in the plan, for example, in phase 2, that triggers the downtown sewering project or designing it as an option. So that's certainly an option that we could put in the plan. And I also think we need to get some, the other thing I've been working on is a public participation plan. The town's already done a lot of this, as you guys know. You've been at it for a long time, but we need to make some decisions on what goes into the plan. I'm giving you options, and it may be that we want to get some feedback from people on those kind of things, because you're right, we do have options, or the town does have options. We're making this presumption that the sewering is more expensive, and it probably is based upon the numbers we got now, but you're right, these are new technologies and we need to learn more. So maybe this adaptive planning process is a way to do that and preserve your options, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's a good point.
Bert?
Yeah, John.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't mean to belabor this, but I do think looking forward, that is not today, but down the road, Wellfleet has to think about the aging population it has, how that aging population is going to be able to manage, being less ambulatory, et cetera. And one of the obvious things is to build up the density downtown to allow, in the future, to allow not 2 stories, but 3, 4 stories in the downtown, to allow much greater density in the downtown. And that's why I think we should think about the possibility of maybe the downtown having some sort of sewage system for the downtown makes sense, not today, but looking into the future, where we're trying to deal with, trying to get affordable housing for the elderly. Where would be the best place to put affordable housing for the elderly? It's not out at the COA, it's in the downtown where people can get to, Lima's, et cetera. So I think we just need to keep that in mind, that we're not thinking about just today and nitrogen loads today. We're thinking about what the town's going to look like and what we want the town to look like in 30 years. We may not want to see, 3-story affordable housing downtown, but if we do, we have to be able to have an infrastructure that'll absorb that. I know I'm pushing this, but
No. I think it's fine, John. And I think what we've done in this process is actually develop the cost estimates for those various futures. I mean, if people decide that they want to put a sewer system in and do, affordable housing or dense housing downtown, we have a number to be able to say to the town, okay, here's what the sewage treatment system is going to look like. We're going to put it, here's where we'd run, here's what the cost would be. We have a collection location at the transfer station that's already been vetted to be able to handle that. So the option is on the table. We've got costing, we have a way of being able to communicate to people. You want to do that, here's what it looks like. That's one alternative. If you don't want to do that, here's the other alternative. And here's what those costs look like. So I think as a committee, I hope we've done a great job for the town and great service in being able to develop those alternatives so people can look at them all and start to weigh what they think the future really should look like. I don't think we make that decision. I think our job has been to, create options and to provide alternatives and let people decide what they think the future should look like. Make sense? So Scott, if you want to just, so I don't know if we've finished with 95 Lawrence. We've got some preliminary numbers. I think the next step is to probably look at, what the town's cost share would look like for capital and O&M. So we have an exact number, and to look at the staging of how that would, whether that's next town meeting or the following town meeting, but at what point the town would have to pull the trigger on making a decision.
Yeah, my suggestion would be those numbers I gave you are the numbers that I have in my report that Dave gave me, but I would suggest that if you're going to put them in the town meeting article, we get them directly from Dave Formato's report just to verify those numbers. But I think my sense is it would be a good idea to be transparent and let the town voters know what they're in for here. No surprises. So we can add those to I don't know who drafts the warrant article, but somehow that could be put in there as a future cost, because I mean, spending the money on the groundwater discharge permit without the other stuff is a little bit of a waste of money, right? I mean, you don't need the permit if you're not going to build the plant. So,
right.
I don't need to spend a lot of time on the rest of these. I don't know what you want to do, Kurt. They're probably less definitive, but we can. I know Nancy's here, and I'll just maybe quickly mention. As you all know, we've been talking about a PRB project down along Commercial Street. It looks like it has some merit. I've talked to the people at EPA about it and DEP, and I think they're both interested and supportive of it. But the first step is this so-called hydrogeologic study to figure out, much like what we heard tonight from GHD out at the transfer station, you need to put some wells in, determine groundwater flow directions, et cetera, to sort of conceptually design the thing. And then that $350,000 cost is probably a second year cost, much like we were talking earlier, unless you wanted to authorize it now to build some kind of a pilot project and test it. It looks like a good bet. And that could be broken down into 2 steps, 2 years, if we want to try to make the bite at the apple a little bit smaller. But that's what that one's all about. Keep going, or questions on that?
Yeah. Anybody have any questions on that? I mean, essentially what we're looking at is, my screen's not letting me see the, we're talking about something that looks like, 1.5 million kind of warrant article. Oops. So, the difference between, 1.5 and 1 or 1.2, in terms of this, I think what the ultimate goal is to get a set of strategies that are based on your reduction targets, right, Scott?
Yep.
So these flow from a strategy to really meet certain reduction targets. The other critical one here is the salt marsh restoration, Howes Pond and Mayo Creek. Because the Howes Pond, Mass DOT is in the process of reconfiguring or doing work on, the Main Street Route 6, upgrade. And this is a critical project as far as getting something done within the time frame of that project. So that's very time sensitive. The other thing is from the perspective of the Conservation Commission, they're very concerned about, and Hillary's very concerned about the salt marsh that's currently constrained and restricted, actually dying and really, there are other critical, critical environmental concerns there in terms of turtles, in terms of eels, and in terms of the marsh. that if something doesn't get done with House Pond, that could be lost. It could be a real disaster. Mayo Creek is kind of in the same boat, but what's interesting is Mass DOT has been using these self-regulated tide gates to install those where they've had all kinds of other tide gates. And one of the beauties of them is that you can set the tide gate up so that you don't have any flooding concerns. In other words, restrict the incoming tide water to a level that assures that you're not going to have higher than a certain level of water on the other side of the gate, which then means you can, over time, if negative consequences don't come, and it looks like there's an opportunity to introduce additional tidal exchange, just by changing how the gate operates, you can actually accomplish that. So it's a pretty cool way of doing something incrementally to do marsh restoration while substantially minimizing any impacts to neighboring properties.
The self-regulating tide gates, they're all mechanical. There's no digital in there. They're all analog.
Right.
You move the thing up and down.
Yeah.
You know, the weight up and down, and you just change it. It just changes. It's brilliant. Real simple process.
So that's what those two things were in there for. And then since Nancy's on, I don't know, Scott, if you've been working with your students and Nancy on trying to come up with a shellfish proposal.
Yeah, these numbers are just really a placeholder, but I wanted to put something in here because we've had ongoing dialogue with Nancy and Johnny and others. They've been very helpful. And basically just been kind of thinking about what could be done to enhance that fishery. And these are a couple of the items we've been talking about. I think by the time town meeting rolls around, we'll have a better detail on this, but I thought it would be worth putting a placeholder in here. As we all know, there's been a lot of discussion about shellfish as part of the solution. I know there's also been a lot of debate about that, but my thought is at this point in time, looking at what the other Cape towns are going, there's some recent work that came out of the town of Orleans in Lonnie's Pond that looked very promising in terms of some real numbers in terms of water quality benefits, and Falmouth has produced similar data. So this is starting to become a little bit more of a agreed upon benefit from a nitrogen standpoint. And so I thought it was worth at least including a placeholder here. And Nancy, I don't know if you want to add or subtract to what I just said. Please feel free.
Okay. Yeah, I think a placeholder is good. And you know, what I'm going to need to do is whatever we end up deciding, I'm going to need to take it to Shellfish Advisory and just get some feedback from the community. I don't feel comfortable just marching ahead as a department without getting the advisory board involved. I did have a question. And when you were talking about Hillary in the beginning, and about the reporting that needs to be done.
Yes.
So if we add stuff into this, if the shellfish department adds these things in, who is responsible for doing the monitoring and reporting on what's happening? I would assume it would be our department because we're out there.
You know, it's a great question, Nancy, and I actually had the same thought. I think I may have mentioned this to you, Kurt. What everybody's been talking about across Barnstable County with this RME structure is specifically for INA septics, but the question you're raising, Nancy, is right on. We're going to need, DP is going to want to see performance data compiled and presented on all of these technologies. So it may be that contract is broader than just the INAs. It could overlap into many, if not all, of these other areas. So it's a good question.
But how are you going to get somebody who is experienced in INAs and then is going to understand PRBs,
Right.
and then is going to be able to gauge and monitor and do analysis on shellfish propagation? I mean, it sounds like 3 different types of entities. You know, I'm going to say the same thing that Hillary said.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way that my 3-person department could take on that. I mean, we're struggling as it is to kind of rise to the level of the demands of this town for an industry that is, you know, the number one industry in town year round.
Yeah, and Nancy, thanks for reminding me. We had this talk before, and I apologize for not having a bullet here about at least a part-time or another staff person, because we did talk about that. And I think that obviously should go with this under the Shellfish program.
Yeah, how I would see this is for each of these, you know, I think you're going to have to, well, for example, with Shellfish, what I would envision there is, you know, somebody like Anna Maria Frankic, you know, leading a team to do the investigative work and the qualification work that she did on the original project to continue to qualify something like Shellfish. And clearly that's not something that you could do, Nancy, within your department. And the same thing would be true with, you know, with a permeable reactive barrier. You know, we would need specific, you know, a specific monitoring team, you know, on, you know, hired, probably a consultant in that case, to do the monitoring work that would be required to report back on what that's actually yielding.
I think that function is in this budget here, the
Right.
monitoring. Yeah.
So what's not in the Shellfish budget, it would be the similar capacity.
Yep.
So what you're saying is that, can you just, what does that mean for this line item here, shellfish propagation, 80 grand?
What it means is there should also be a pilot project monitoring component. There would be an additional amount of money for probably a consultant from one of the universities to be able to do the monitoring portion and reporting.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, because it's very specialized. You know, I would think somebody like Anna Maria Frankic, that type of a person is what you'd want to do. You know, and there are plenty of people in the academic institutions who would love the opportunity to work on a project like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
So anybody have any other questions on that? I wanted to flip here to sources of money other than the town's budget. Are we good to go? I don't see anybody. Okay. So these are the preliminary grant and revenue sources that we identified. And I'll preface this by saying we did have a great meeting. It's on here as a budget item to discuss the budget with town staff. So we did have a meeting, Scott, Hillary, myself, Heather, and Maria, to sort of present this to them and say, hey, look, we're, you know, for this year, we think we probably want to do a warrant item that looks like about 1.5 million for these particular items. And we don't know how to put this in the town budget, you know, and there's an ongoing requirement that's going to be necessary for, you know, for the IAs. It's not just a first year thing. It's a, you know, year 2, year 3. How do we, if we have a 5 or 10 year budget plan, how would we start to roll that into town budgeting? Same is true with 95 Lawrence. You know, we've got not just the, you know, the discharge permit, but then obviously the capital operating costs and a department that's actually going to have to operate a facility, right? People, you know, running that wastewater treatment plant that's on site. Now that could be subcontracted. There's a variety of ways to do it, but at the end of the day, you know, Scott had about $81,000 in, you know, in operating costs associated with managing the, you know, the treatment facility, in addition to the capital cost. So we kind of threw this like spaghetti at the wall to Maria and Heather to kind of start them thinking about, you know, is it a mix of town warrant articles where maybe, you know, yearly we come back for a particular new project? You know, is it, you know, monies that are available from, you know, the Airbnb tax that's more like a regular revenue stream? How do we mix the things that are out there for potential grant sources and revenue sources with the capital needs that we would have, you know, for the projects that Scott's outlined on the previous slide? So with that, Scott, do you want to kind of maybe walk through this?
I think we maybe just take some questions. There's a lot of stuff to go through here. People can see the main points. Go ahead, Fred.
So, I mean, this is gonna be, I mean, like, I'm kind of looking at this, I always go, this is a 30-year plan, guys. This is gotta be part of capital and operating budget every year, right?
Yep.
You know, it's sort of like, okay, the capital, you know, we've got tax revenues, we've got short-term rental tax revenue. All of this comes into the you know, the general fund for the town of Wellfleet. But, you know, guys, we have to think 30 years out. So can't we just sort of say on a yearly basis, wastewater, water, you know, just the basic costs are going to be these for operating all of these different things. So $50,000 a year and subsidies, blah, blah, blah. And we just have to plan on that, because I don't know how else you would do it, you know, and then, yeah, there are going to be one-time costs. We can definitely look to like your rural development and everything else, you know, to help us cover. But, you know, but overall, there is going to be a year-to-year capital and operating costs. Well, definitely operating costs. Capital costs are typically one-time events, or two, you know, or you know, a couple fiscal year events. So that's how I look at it. I don't know if how we cannot. And the other thing to point out is that I'm looking at all these grant revenue sources, and I'm kind of going, Massachusetts Marine Fisheries, from my understanding, is about to pour a ton of money into marine fisheries as part of their and as part of the whole wind exploration. That part of that is, okay, we got to give money to the fishermen to ensure that they have, you know, that these offshore wind farms don't destroy their livelihood. I don't know if you've investigated that at all.
We can add it to the list. Elaine, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I kind of was thinking about what Fred was saying, and with all I'm hearing today, I mean, I think it's really forward thinking for the town to look to have a staff person that is helping to keep us healthy and sustainable going forward in all these various areas. So, you know, I think an annual cost estimate is kind of good. I think thinking about a person, I think you could put it in a way that the town would really support it. I did want to add, and obviously there's money available. You've put together an incredible list. And so I just under 95 Lawrence, I wanted to add community preservation funds, because it's affordable housing. We're looking to try to find $500 to $1 million to help with 95 Lawrence from community preservation funds. And Mass Works should be under 95 Lawrence too, because it's an obvious slam dunk for housing and this kind of need. But I really think your discussion has been really, really interesting and really forward thinking, and presenting that to the town in this way, I think could really make a huge difference.
John?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but the Energy and Environmental Committee is looking at resiliency, and one of their concerns is with rising sea level and increasing storm surges, that our roads, particularly Commercial Street, will become increasingly flooded, and they're looking at ways to deal with that and looking for grants to raise Commercial Street. And it seems to me that's an area where we can piggyback on their work to say, okay, well, if we're building up barriers to protect Commercial Street, let's put our permeable reactive barriers as making it part of that process. The problem, of course, is the state likes to channel sources of money in very discrete areas and not overlap. But I think the possibility of they're increasingly looking at trying to piggyback things together at the state level. And I think for us, particularly the Commercial Street is an area where we can get money for both the permeable reactive barrier and resiliency money to protect Commercial Street from storm surges.
John, I just want to comment on that. I agree with you, and Ryan's still with us here. We had a really good discussion with the Conservation Commission about the possibility. One of the permeable reactive barrier technologies is something called the bulkhead PRB. And they built one of these down in Long Island where, you know, they were redoing a bulkhead on a seawall. And they essentially said, let's throw some wood chips in there. And they've got very good results of this. And I think what we were thinking of along the lines of your comment is, if people are going to be investing money rebuilding some of the seawalls and bulkheads, not only along Commercial Street, but other places too, that's the time to go in and think about trying to integrate some of these technologies. And the one down on Long Island worked very well. One of my thoughts about this pilot project would be to do exactly that, test that technique, because I agree with you. You got sea level rise coming, you got big tides. The big tides might enable us to get in deeper during a low tide and get an excavation and some wood chips in at a deeper elevation depth while you're building it. So Ryan, I don't know if you want to comment, but I know you've been pretty interested in this as well, if you're still with us there.
Can I just-
Not right now. I have a meeting shortly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I mean, guys, I don't mean to be like, you know, the naysayer, but I mean, like putting up bulkheads and things like that is, you know, from my agency's perspective, is not what we want to pay for. We want to pay for retreatment. We wanted people to retreat from the thing. So the concept would be like, you know, I know what FEMA's looking at. FEMA's looking at, we would buy out Commercial Street and just tear everything down and let it just flood, you know. Because that's what sea level rise wants to do, instead of spending millions and billions of dollars on seawalls. I know that's a terrible thing to say. I mean, like, you know, even though people don't want to hear that, but that's essentially where the grant money is right now.
And
Well,
Fred, let me just say that I would agree with you, generally speaking, and I do, but I'm not a sea level rise expert by any means. But I guess what I should have said is, if the town decides to so-called stand and fight with an approach in some areas of town, then this might be a viable add-on. If the town decides not to retreat, then I would agree with you 100%. But that's a big decision the town's going to need to make.
Yeah, I don't think that's within the purview of the wastewater plan, but going back to 95 Lawrence for a second, Elaine, you mentioned CPA and Mass Works. One of the thoughts that I had here was also to try to divide and conquer, so to speak. I mean, I think there's certain things in here. Well, for example, the wastewater element of it that would be eligible for certain kinds of funding that the project itself may not. And so my thought there was to kind of separately put in grants, whether it's Mass Works or, rural small town or the, some potential USDA funding, but to put in a separate grant request specifically for the wastewater component. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it does. We heard in Brewster, they had submitted a Mass Works grant for water, and then they tacked on wastewater and got an extra $600,000. Next year I would go for it. Okay.
My thinking was too that's one of the most real projects here. It's urgent, it's present. I think we could put in a very successful application. As Scott said, I think it's an award-winning, concept that we've been working on here together.
Right.
So.
But I think. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Kurt, for that reason, I questioned, and somebody else brought it up before, is should we be asking for 150,000 Or should we be closer to the cost of doing it? You're having a discussion with the select board after this, is that correct?
Yeah, they had wanted us to come in and present. The other thing is that I think if we have, I don't know, if we were going to do a Mass Works proposal for 95 Lawrence,
Right.
we would put in for the whole thing.
I was going to say, but if we
You know,
incorporated that into this now, again, we don't have to spend the money now. We probably do have to spend the ground lease, at least the initial work. But it would also give us a stronger position politically with regard to the Mass Works application that the town is committing to this, a la the water system, where we also got the Mass Works money.
and that might be a good place to take off from, both in, to address Fred's concern too, because, here's an example where your construction costs, your capital costs can be deferred from a variety of grant sources, but the town's going to be stuck with the operating cost, period.
Right. Well, in the case of 95 Lawrence, though, you would have the initial construction cost that you would ask the developer to defer. That's the 44% of
Right.
some number like $1 million. But you also have an ongoing cost that they would be have to pay, which would be in the normal course of things if they were connecting to an established treatment plant.
Right. The problem is, and the problem is that the rest of the cost has to be paid by somebody as well. And the, fire and school
Right.
Connections and police connection, and the neighborhood connection, right? If the neighborhood ultimately is connecting as well, those connections are providing watershed benefits. And it's not quite the same as, an individual homeowner hooking up to a sewage treatment plant or to a sewage connection.
Right.
It's a little bit different. So, there's an argument to be made there that the town should be, clearly it's going to need to fund at least the operating costs associated with the connections for fire, police, and school. And then, it's maybe a little bit more of an open question of whether the town would or should fund, the additional operating costs associated with connecting part of the neighborhood.
But again, those are probably costs that those are 3, 4, 5 years out. Not something that you have to incur now. I understand it's a liability you're asking the town to take on, but it's not imminent.
Right. No, and that's why we're having discussions with Finance Committee. We need to have more of those. We need to have more with administration to discuss exactly that sort of thing. And, how do we engage the staffing that, Elaine was talking about a second ago,
Right.
that's going to be required because everybody's shorthanded. Elaine, you had your hand up?
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't take it down, but Kurt, are you thinking that we should be looking at just a separate request at town meeting for Lawrence Road, or?
No,
No.
I think we just put it in one. I think it's much more, if strategically, we've kicked this around a couple of times, Scott, Hillary, myself, and I think we've had discussions, within the committee, and certainly if committee members have, different opinions or other ideas. I think if we started to break this apart, it's going to get really messy for the town.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a situation where somebody doesn't like a permeable reactive barrier, and they love the salt marsh restoration. And so they're going to vote against the permeable reactive barrier and for the salt marsh restoration. And suddenly your whole plan goes to, what, in a handbag.
Okay.
So I think it's best that, part of what is going to be the driving factor in all this going forward. And I think hopefully the town will have some faith and trust in the people that are managing this to make prudent decisions about what's cost effective and focus energy and resources on the things that are cost effective as we get information coming back from any of these programs that says, hey, this program's not working, that it's going to get abandoned, or what's not working gets fixed. And for a program that's doing better than expected, one would expect as part of adaptive management that we would suggest spending more money on that one. And that's kind of the way it, because there's just so much we don't know.
Mhm.
Did you have any other thoughts, Scott, on that?
No, I think this is a good discussion.
Anyone else?
As far as the warrant article is concerned, you want to keep it at that 1.5 blah, blah, blah $1 million and just say, this is what, out of the box, we want to ask the town to, borrow, take from tax revenue or get grant funding for otherwise. I can't remember how it's.
Yeah, it would be couched the way Gary suggested, which is it would be a borrowing authorization.
Yeah.
So the authorization amount would be that number, and we'd only actually borrow what we couldn't find grants for. Under that scenario, which begs the question that Gary asked earlier, which is, scenario 1 is put 1.5 in front of the town. Scenario 2 is to put something that looks like 7.2, I think, if the capital cost is 4.7 for Lawrence Road, plus 1.5, you're looking at 7.2. So that, that would be another way to look at this.
One option would be the middle number there is 2.5, Kurt. That takes in the municipal buildings. And I think that gets into the project into a little bit of a net positive. So if that's a lot more palatable, maybe that's a first step and you could still let them know you're going to come back for discussion with the larger project, but maybe the 2.4, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's the better strategy anyway. I agree.
Yep.
Because it's a little bit smaller number, but that's the minimum of what we think we need to do.
Right.
Two comments. When you actually article, it could be for wastewater treatment and management for project as. So you're not committing. You don't know when each of these projects is going to go forward or if they're forward. So that would give you a little bit more flexibility, Kurt. So the wording of the warrant article gives you more leeway, as opposed to saying it's specifically for this and for no other purpose.
Right. Yeah, and I think administration will have something to say about making sure that there's enough flexibility in it too.
Right. And the other thing is, I note on here, sometime in the future, not distant future, will be the marijuana tax. Might as well use it, put it to some use.
Yeah, I hope that from the existing resources that we can do a great job of attracting those existing resources to this program.
Yeah. And
hopefully, marijuana and other things can go for, there's a lot of other needs in the town that the town's trying to deal with, including affordable housing. So we're trying to be as careful as we can, I think. And, it'd be great if the town was willing to just simply commit the Airbnb tax, which was designed for wastewater, for example. If we can make some progress there, I think we'll start to get a handle on this.
We're looking at that from the housing perspective as well. Maybe we'll make some common cause. I've got to go to the select board meeting, but I just want to say thank you so much, guys. This is really terrific. Thank you for all the hard work and the right direction. Anything we can do to help and support it, we're welcome to do it.
Thank you, Gary.
Terrific, Gary. Well, good luck at your meeting.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. So we're pretty close to.
To sell this at town meeting, maybe I'm getting in front of this thing. So we come up with a number, 1.5, 3, 7, we say this is the number, right? But to sell it, we basically say, up until this point, how much have we asked for the town to get us here? And now this is where the rubber hits the road. We have to protect the shellfish. We have to protect, we have to meet nitrogen load requirements. We have to do all of these things. This is our first kind of this is where we are now, we need the town to pony up some money, because this is a 30-year plan, and this is the start of this. We're going to have to invest in our future. We have to invest in our future now. In the past, we haven't done that as well as we should have, right? Is my point. I remember when I was looking at the water system in town and realized that the town had been looking at centralized water since like the 60s, right? And they didn't put it in until, I don't know, 1990 something, It took them 30 years, we don't have 30 years. We got to do it now. So how do we, I guess my point is that this is our, this is the first, is this the first time that we're really asking for some serious jing from the town?
It is. And the question is, the town's, so far the town has approved $500,000 for the original wastewater plan with Environmental Partners Group in 2010. 2 years ago, the town approved $120,000 for consulting support for both water and wastewater. And so some of that support is what's supporting Scott. And other elements of that are supporting water board, water efforts, water system efforts. So that's what the town's committed so far. And we're at a crossroads now, as you put it very well, Fred. But we're at the crossroads now of what should we be taking to the town as the logical next step. John?
Yeah, I think the point, I can't remember, I think you made it, Kurt, that we have to be very careful we don't bundle things and then a part of that bundle pisses enough people off that the whole thing falls. I think that's a very important point. It's also important to remember it's cheap right now for the town to borrow money. And may never be as cheap as it is now.
Right.
So we don't want to limit ourselves thinking, well, in the future, we can go after money. If we can get money now, we're going to get it at a discounted rate, basically. So we have to balance, I think, both of those things. But I'm very, very aware of the point you made that we could kill this whole thing by putting things together that pisses enough people off that the whole thing goes down. And we don't want that at all. That's the worst possible outcome.
Yeah. The other thing I think that's true, your point about money being as cheap as it's ever going to be right now is is absolutely right. The other thing is that a lot of these grant opportunities are for innovative and alternative stuff. And the people who are early to the table with those kinds of projects. I mean, for example, in our discussions with DEP, who was it that offered? They've been very forthcoming about offering support in grant funding for elements like Millie, for example, was talking about supporting the PRB project. There's things that are going to be able to happen now that after a couple of people walk through those doors are going to close. So, grant funds and cheap money, it will go away. We have a unique opportunity right now. I'm trying to think.
Is there any advantage to breaking this one warrant article into several warrant articles? In other words, maybe it's like, okay, there might be sticker shock at 2.5, but if you said, okay, this is how much it's going to cost for the PRB system. This is how much it's going to cost for the self-regulating tide gates. This is how much it's going to cost for the shellfish culture, right? And then that way, we might lose, a battle, but we'll win the majority of these things. Is there any? I don't know the psychology of town meeting, but I do know that one thing I do know is it's like I'll never forget. Every time you walk into that town meeting, the first article is, here's the capital and operating budget of $18 million or whatever it is. All those opposed, everyone puts their hand, all those approve, everybody puts their hand up, and nobody says no. That's a big dollar item, but talk about buying a new cop car that people can figure out that $30,000-$40,000. They recognize how much that is. You'll have hours of comments about that.
Yep.
So my point being is like, is there what is the psychology here? Do we have any idea at all?
Well, I don't think there's much difference between 1.5 and 2.7 from a town meeting perspective. There's really no difference there. I don't think people can grasp any difference there. But what it does do is it does put us, at least give the 95 Lawrence Road project certainty, for the developer to move forward with that. So I think that's important. I think that's probably the smarter way to go, is to, put that number on the table. With the amount of potential grant funds, we could put the application together right away for Mass Works for the 95 Lawrence project. So, town meeting approves the authorization. At next town meeting, we'd be coming back saying, here's how much we got in grants, and it might be 50 or 75% of what was authorized. But I think the town, back to Scott's earlier point, we haven't really talked about outreach that much yet. But I think, coming up with a strategy for outreach is going to be critical to getting it over the finish line. And that comes back to messaging. That's why I threw up these other slides. I mean, I took a preliminary stab. I sent this to you to look at these slides to start to figure out how we could formulate, a sales pitch for this. And of course, the sales pitch is one thing, the actual number is another thing. And the components, as John alluded to earlier, I feel good about the components. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that's why we wanted to, kind of discuss this. And, do we feel like the components are good, Scott?
Hey, Kurt, I'm sorry. I need to jump to another call. I'm just looking at the time here. I didn't realize what time it was getting to be. But
You've had so much fun.
no, it's been great. It's been really good. I got a lot of notes, as I put in the chat. So I'm sorry that I have to leave shortly here, but there's a lot to follow up on. Kurt, I will give you a call soon because I've got a bunch of follow-up items here. Gentlemen, sorry to leave that. Very good night. Talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Scott. So
I think this is probably a good time to kind of like say, okay, we've been talking for 2 hours.
Yep.
We may want to like leave it with, okay, we got to think about a sales pitch here.
Yeah, so you guys have the slides. What I would do is, think about, do we feel pretty good about the list that we have? What budgetary number do we want to suggest, for town meeting? And then we need to work on, an outreach effort. Scott's already working on that, where he's engaged some students to start to help with an outreach effort. And so at our next meeting, we can talk more about that. But maybe what we should do is just schedule a meeting for next week so that we can follow up on those. Does that make sense?
Sounds good.
It does. I need to leave though.
Okay.
So.
What's good for everybody? You want to do another Tuesday or?
Tuesday at this time work.
Tuesday's okay for me, I think.
Richard?
I think Tuesday's all right.
Sold. Okay. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. We'll schedule another one for next Tuesday. I think it's been a very good discussion. I think we're starting to gel, and that's the important thing.
Good job, Kurt.
Good job.
Good job.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.